Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at this MEIEA Meets event. My name is Armin Shaomian. I am the president of MEIEA, the Music and Entertainment Industry Educators Association. I'm glad to have you with us today for this really special presentation by MusicID. Before we get started, I want to let you know that this session is being recorded. MEIEA records all of our MEIEA Meets events and also our summit events so that we can share with our membership on our YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn channels. So please feel free to check those out. Also, our summit will be virtual this year on May 16 and 17. And to learn more about the upcoming MEIEA Summit, you can go to MEIEAsummit.org. Now I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Paul Coleman over at MusicID to introduce the panelists for today. Thank you very much. Paul.
Thank you, Armin. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank you and all of the MEIEA committee for your support during our sponsorship this year. It's been a privilege to be involved with such amazing institutions and members. So thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I just very briefly want to perhaps provide a quick overview about MusicID before we get stuck into the main event. Just a couple of moments of your time for those of you who aren't aware of MusicID, just to give you a quick understanding about the sort of platform and its capabilities that researchers and academics have been enjoying for many, many years. So firstly, our goal is to be the premier online platform and data archive for the academic community and the music and creative industry. So we have been built and designed for academics to use, for student in teaching, for students, for research, and we're actually the premier aggregator of global music industry data. MusicID consists of 3 premium modules: MusicID Data, MusicID Revenue, and MusicID Impact. With MusicID Data, we've got over 500 million lines of data, 5,500 charts across 74 countries, and there's 60 years worth of chart information that's updated on a weekly basis. We are a unique platform because we can visualize this chart to this information be compared against the value of sales units, albums, singles, artists across countries. It's a unique platform and a unique archive. MusicID Revenue is formulated from more than 500 million data points, and it makes it easy to track the worldwide top earning recordings of the 21st century. And finally, our MusicID Impact module gives you a very strong bird's eye view of popular music history, allowing you to see which recordings have had the greatest cultural impact, dating all the way back to the 1900s. So these 3 pretty fantastic modules are actually allowing huge amounts of innovative research, and more recently, a huge amount of work in and around data literacy, allowing music educators to provide data literacy to their students and actually create some really incredible research and learning that's taking place, which you'll see some examples of that today with today's panel. And most importantly, MusicID is built with academics in mind. It's purely built with our institutions, and MusicID is enjoyed by people all over the world. And just finally, to give you some understanding, as part of our sponsorship of MEIEA this year, we're actually providing a 15% discount for new customers, as well as providing new teaching support resources in and around how to help teach data literacy to students. And we'd really welcome you to actually join our MusicID academic community, which is thriving as well. So please get in contact with us today. If you'd like to learn more about MusicID, if you'd like to have a demonstration, if you'd like to understand more about the sort of capabilities it has, please get in contact with our details there. And with no further ado, I would like to hand you over to my colleague and our resident musicologist, Katie Straker. So Katie, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Let me shuffle my windows back into place here. See, all right, hi everybody, and thanks for joining our second and final edition of MEIEA Meets with MusicID as sponsors. And thanks again to Armin and to MEIEA for giving us the opportunity to share a platform with you. I'm Katie Straker. With MusicID, as Paul said, I wear many hats here, but today I'm here in the capacity as our house musicologist. I'm a PhD candidate at the Graduate Center in Historical Musicology. And my work there is on popular music, but I'm also a medievalist, so I'm here to support everyone as the academic end of things, because what I do is pretty irrelevant to the 21st century into music business. So at our first meet last summer, Dr. Greg Hamilton used the MusicID platform to demonstrate the fundamentals of data literacy, highlighting one of MusicID's uses as a research tool and as a classroom resource. For this meet, we're going to focus on MusicID's research applications. Our platform has over 500 million lines of record chart data representing 74 countries. So what can you do with all that information? More than you would think. So in that respect, our presentations today will show you some of the ways that you can use MusicID as a data source. However, our platform also provides more than just a table of figures. As you saw in Paul's very brief slides, we also have a number of interactive visualizations. And these visualizations of the life cycles in the chart provide some assistance, shall we say, in how you take in and work with the data. So in that respect, MusicID is also a research tool. And we'll discuss both of these aspects and how they can be applied to different kinds of work, whether it's purely academic or more in the music business end of things. So since it's better to show than to tell, I'm joined today by Dr. Matt Flynn of the University of Liverpool and Andrew Ulla and Kayla Robinson, who are from the other USC. As a South Carolinian, USC always means Gamecocks to me, Carolina Gamecocks. So I'm always confused thinking of the one on the West Coast. And our panelists are going to present some research that they've done using MusicID, among other resources, as we'll discuss. And it's good to see all of you together again. The last time, a few of you, I see some familiar names here, were at our seminar that we did last summer, which totally coincidentally I did with Matt and Andrew. They're not on our payroll, and I don't have a contract stipulation that I won't appear in public without them, but they've been they're valuable members of the community. They've been using MusicID in a long time, and they understand the platform really well. So it'll be great for supporting us today and helping you learn how you can apply it to your own work. So before we dig in, let me just briefly review the format, and then I'll throw it over to Andrew and Kayla. So once I finish, we'll have 2 short presentations of about 10 minutes each, with a time for a response from the panel after each one. If at any time you have a question, you can type it into chat or raise your hand, since we're a small group here, and I'm happy to take your questions during the response portion. And then after our second presentation, we'll open up to just a general discussion about some of the research applications and the practical demands of data in the music industry or in music industry education. So please feel free to participate in that with your thoughts and questions in chat, or you can raise your hand here. And let's get on with it then. So I'll throw over to Andrew and Kayla. Andrew Ulla and Kayla Robinson are MBA candidates at the University of Southern California Marshall School of Business, and they're both pursuing a graduate certificate in strategy and management consulting. Andrew's area of focus is in protecting the value of musical works exploited within the digital economy in the interest of music creators and their management teams, and providing them with expertise in royalty collection and rights management across music publishing and recorded music sectors. Kayla is pursuing her talent for project management while expanding her knowledge of key business strategies for growth, utilizing data and critical thinking to provide valuable recommendations to multifaceted organizations. And the project they're sharing with us today explores issues and opportunities within the music streaming economy and with respect to remuneration to music creators, seeking insights as to how the current streaming ecosystem supplies tools to monetize fan engagement and music content consumption. So I'll turn off my camera and take it away, Andrew and Kayla.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and attending our presentation. My name is Andrew, and my classmate Kayla and I are in an innovation class together. We're exploring the music streaming economy. And as Katie has mentioned in her kind introduction, how music creators can better monetize their fan bases online. So now I'm going to share my screen. Yes, as Katie had mentioned, my name is Andrew Ulla, and I'm in my final semester at USC, studying strategy management consulting, really to focus on how music creators can create value for themselves. And Kayla can have her own introduction.
Hi, my name is Kayla Robinson, also a 3rd-year MBA PM student at Marshall School of Business, focusing a lot on product and project management within creative industries, as well as health and wellness.
Cool. The first point that we wanted to talk about is how streaming is really concentrated at the top end of consumption. So we can see that most of the earnings, or 90% of the earnings, are going to about 10% of the overall consumption. So that means that you have to really be placed within the top 10% to earn anything within the current music streaming economy. And the problem that we're exploring is how music creators can perhaps generate income if they're in the other 90%. So exploring business models around that to create value for themselves and to make money off of a less of a fan following. So we're saying you shouldn't necessarily have to be at the top in the superstar economy to necessarily earn some type of a living. Just for quick highlights, 100,000 streams equates to a couple $100,000, but 100 million streams, but how many people actually earn and it can attain those types of figures? So that's more or less of the research that we're exploring. So to hand it off, Kayla is going to speak a little bit about fragmented fan bases.
Thank you, Andrew. So as we entered into our research, one of the first things we noticed is that artists and content creators, as well as the consumers, are spread across a variety of media platforms, as you can see here. The consumer base is essentially fragmented across the various platforms. So we are asking ourselves, what is the opportunity here? How can we maximize reach for the artist and expand the access consumers have to the art as well as the artist, while simultaneously centralizing the overall demand? So pulling data, pulling data through a platform like MusicID helps to aggregate the data for our overall analysis. Now, as we explore the fragmented fan base, it will be interesting to dissect the consumer engagement across the different platforms and discover or compare the unique value proposition of each platform.
Thank you. So next, I really want to talk about why this whole fragmented ecosystem is a problem for music creators. So currently the setup that a music creator has to do is, once the work has been distributed out into the music streaming economy, they have to go forward and register with multiple different royalty sources to collect off of a single point of consumption. So you have one song on Spotify or Pandora, you have 4 corresponding registrations for that one singular song. And this creates a problem because it creates issues in tracking your royalty payments for an already really low value system. So if you're in the bottom 90%, then you're basically tracking pennies at that point by registering with multiple places. So this is another issue that we are exploring with how fragmented everything is.
So one of the conversations that has come up throughout our research is the impact of the metaverse on the music industry and its business model. We can draw from examples similar to Fortnite's Travis Scott's concert, which allowed his fan base, approximately 28 million people, to attend a virtual live concert. This ability to mirror real life through a platform may provide artists and consumers the autonomy to connect at potentially a lower investment.
Right. And moving forward with talking about other ways that artists are earning money within the virtual economy is NFTs. You can potentially create, essentially the metaverse is going to mirror everything that's going on in the real world. So there are a lot of business models that surround actual concerts. So, but in a digital standpoint, we'll be able to actually curate content that and monetize it directly from the concert. So you can create little NFTs where fans participate by buying these NFTs. Or another interesting point is the whole reversing of the streaming economics. So traditionally speaking, you'll have artists, the release schedule is you release a song or an album, and then you generate some type of attraction off of that. And then you have enough, basically fans, and then you make your money off of selling live shows. Well, the metaverse could totally reverse the whole system of the album release cycle to tour. And now Kayla is going to talk a little bit about some of the other opportunities like merchandise.
Yeah, so through the metaverse, the revenue streams can range. Artists can sell merchandise for personal branding, such as T-shirts, or a lot of the discussion were like T-shirts after a concert that will allow individuals in this metaverse to brand it in their day-to-day throughout the platform, and even explore brand partnerships within the platform, such as athletes with particular brands within that industry. Ticket sales also through the platform will also contribute to the artist's revenue, while consumers get access to exclusive content, which provides a more VIP experience.
Thank you. And all this goes to say is platforms like MusicID will be able to help artists and music creators and their managers to track the overall consumption. So the whole data aggregation will be very important for centralizing the consumption in a way that you can actually analyze it and take a purchase to monetizing. Just some quick highlights about what the metaverse is projected to look like in the next couple of years. It's $800 billion that consumers will likely spend, is projected to spend by 2024. So that's a really massive market that music creators can tap into. Just for reference, the music copyright industry as it stands today is about a $40 billion industry. Well, that pales in comparison to 800 billion by 2024. And it's all about how music creators are positioning themselves within this growing economy. Thank you.
Thank you.
There. All right. Oh, you guys can stay on. We're all going to chat now. And Matt, if you have any responses for them too, then please put back in. Thanks so much for that. That's super interesting. I jotted down a few questions. So I'll ask you some of the general questions that I have first, and then we can talk more into how maybe MusicID has factored into the work. But of course, my first interest is in the things that I don't know about. So, so as you say, in the supply chain for all this with the fragmentation, the artists have to register numerous times to even get the royalties. And I know from our end, like my end as a musicologist, trying to trace influence and spread and things like that across some of these different platforms. Also, it's difficult because it's fragmented, because you're having to look at so many different services, because something can be, I'm very aware of how you can't use so-and-so is the #1 artist on Apple Music as any kind of indicator of their overall success. Like I happened to look at Neil Young the other week, because obviously he's a big news now for streaming platforms since he left Spotify and went to Apple Music. And so I looked him up in MusicID just to get the quick look at some of his streaming chart history. And interestingly, he had no streaming chart history at all, really, at least for singles. I believe I was looking at singles. And I didn't see much of anything in digital sales or streaming platforms until the Apple Music. So that's interesting. Like from there, I would want to dig into like how long that will last and what impact that had in his revenue for the year versus previous years and things like that. So it opens up a lot of interesting questions for me. But that's getting to the question is, so for us, it's difficult to look at some of the consolidated view of how well they're doing in streaming. You can't really say someone's doing well in streaming or not, kind of. So on your end, so for tracing the royalties, this is where I'm just showing my ignorance, not being in the music business. I assume there's a central resource for chasing all the value, or do you have to kind of look through each platform to see how much they got in each one and add it up?
So MusicID is really useful because it allows you to centralize the consumption into one place. And even if you register your works with Sound Exchange, with the the Mechanical Licensing Collective, with ASCAP, with BMI, and your record label and your publisher, they're all receiving the data from a myriad of different sources. But MusicID is a great tool to be able to reconcile your consumption across different platforms and to verify if these various royalty sources are paying you correctly. So having a source of truth like MusicID is really valuable because the digital supply chain is so fragmented. All of these players could essentially misallocate your royalties. And unless you have like a point of reference between all the different DSPs, royalty sources, it can be really challenging. And a lot of royalties end up in something called the black box, which is about 20 to 30% of royalties go misallocated or unpaid to music creators every single year because of this issue. So MusicID is very useful for that type of research.
Well, no, thank you. I hadn't even thought about that. So that's a great answer. That's horrible that up to 30% is going missing, even if it is just, from the top 10, as you say, who maybe won't notice the small hit. And just on product information, and we also have the revenue platform, which Paul mentioned, which is an aggregation of all of the value across the supply chain for the top 2,000 or so artists of a given year or the 21st century. Our data starts in the year 2000. So if you were to look into that platform, that's another way that you can look at the earnings across the supply chain as far as recordings go. It doesn't have ticket sales and things like that, but that's another resource that you can bring in to try to track some of the totals, but not broken down, of course, by individual platform.
Yeah, Revenue ID is really that is a really great tool as well, because it allows music creators, if they've charted on a specific chart on the Billboard charts, it allows them to see like what is the projected value based on chart position. So it is another way for artists and managers to compare what earnings have I received versus what has been forecasted based on the calculations that are made there.
That's super interesting. And my last question, and just as a reminder, all of you listening, please feel free to chime in and chat if you have a question, but we'll also have time in the end to add anything in if you think of something later or if you have a general question. But the metaverse is also obviously a hip topic now and super interesting. It's something that I'm kind of just learning about myself. And I know one of the interesting things about NFTs is that considering for the resale market, if you have an image, and I don't even know the full scope of different things you can do with the NFTs, but I know that if you resale it, that is tied into the royalties so that the original creator will still get a cut when it's resold. So if your ape that you create, for example, ends up being valued at $300,000, if you sold it originally for $1,000, resell it for $300,000, some of that money goes to the creators, or at least as an option for them. So I wonder, how are the royalties traced and allocated throughout these things in the metaverse? Because of course there are so many different kinds of intellectual property. There are images, I guess most of it would be images, but I don't even know what else. Is there music specifically? Like, can you sell a song NFT? And how does that economy differ from some of the others? Like, I assume presumably they get a bigger piece of the pie.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see what happens, how much of the metaverse and NFTs and Web3 is going to be a completely new system, or how much is going to utilize the historical systems in place, and what copyright protections are actually going to be there and what they're going to look like. So that is still to be determined, but if you are releasing an NFT that is not tied to an original work that is prior, then you are in the clear to kind of create these new systems of creating value. Where the discussions are still TBD is, how do you integrate an older piece of a work that's being integrated into an NFT that needs to pay out the music publishing components? That's still that's to be determined, because all this stuff is like still very new.
Right, that was foremost in my mind there, is that all of this is still so decentralized and completely unregulated. So I wonder, I see sometimes creators getting dollar signs in their eyes about some of the resale market and some of this, but obviously there's a lot of room in this for cheating people out of what they're owed, because you can claim someone else's property so easily, and there's no way to, currently there's not much oversight for that.
Yeah, what it's doing is right now the value chain, the supply chain is so long, and what NFTs is doing is it's chopping all of that off and creating an entirely new thing.
Yeah.
But what about everything that happens prior? Is it going to be integrated into the new thing, or is it not? So I think that we'll start to see some type of a hybrid take place. This is just my personal opinion.
All right, great, thanks. Well, let's move over to Matt now, and then any more questions anyone might have for them, we can come back to. Let's see, so Matt Flynn is a lecturer in the music industry program at the University of Liverpool. And I know he's been working with MusicID for years now, or at least a year. I have lost all sense of time in the pandemic. But he has designed a master's course in teaching analysis in the music industry, if that's, correct me if I'm wrong, around the MusicID platform. So he's got a lot of great examples of applications that he's used and some of his students have used as they carried into the industry. So yeah, take it away, Matt.
Thanks very much, Katie. And thanks, Andrew and Kayla, for a great presentation. In some ways, it sets up what I'm going to do. Can everyone see the screen? Give me a yay.
Yep, all good, Matt.
Okay,
yep.
Brilliant. So yeah, in a way, some of the problems that Andrew and Kayla alluded to in terms of, copyright management now has become requires also a myriad of data management, and as the students on our music industry studies program, MA, come through, increasingly we're having to deal with managing datafication, and how they understand datafication and start to embed how they start to deal with big data into the curriculum. And last year I was here talking about my aspiration to do this. We haven't got a dedicated datafication module yet. That is the long-term ambition, where MusicID will be embedded as an integral part. At the minute, I'm ratcheting this delivery into modules that deal with contracts and copyright, and modules that deal with music industry management. But certainly, the last presentation gave us a great overview of the direction of travel as well, and the increase in amount of data that needs to be collected. So for the first time last year, I resolved to use MusicID as a platform that was embedded in a module, and in one of the assessment tasks, the students had to use it as a resource in answering the questions that I'd set. And so I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of some of the questions that are set, and a couple of examples of how students use MusicID as part of answering those questions. So for those of you who might not know, Hipgnosis is a music copyright management fund that trades on the London Stock Exchange, and has been very prominent in the market over the last 4 or 5 years, buying up the catalogs or acquiring portions of catalogs from writers and producers. And so I posed as one of the questions, the students had to do a 3,000-word essay on this topic, and they had to use MusicID to formulate part of their answer. And so at the time, Hipgnosis had just announced another funding round raise. So I thought it would be a good question to be able to get the students to focus on the catalogs that Hipgnosis owned, and then figure out, whether from an investment point of view, Hipgnosis would be a worthwhile investment based upon the strength of the catalog that Hipgnosis is using in the market. And as you can see here on the right-hand side of my screen, possibly the left on yours, the MusicID graph there of All I Want for Christmas, and also a little bit of text at the bottom, taken from one of the students' essays that talks about how the song has become the 14th biggest selling single in total between 2000 and 2021, and it uses MusicID's revenue system to give an indication of the total revenue it's generated. And the graph here clearly shows how the song has increased in popularity since its first release, and the number of countries and those types of things. You just get a very visual representation straight away. And so that's one example of how the students started to use the platform to begin to assess the value of the catalogue that Hipgnosis owned. A different student took a different approach and used the MusicID in a different way and looked at the writings and productions of Pooh Bear, who's signed to Hipgnosis and has produced, you know, some of the biggest hits. An example was "What Do You Mean" by Justin Bieber. And interestingly, as Katie was saying before, he compared that to Neil Young, who's signed with Hipgnosis, and looked at Neil Young's sort of sales and the predominant sales of, you know, most of his album sales and stuff happened in the 1970s, and compared these two different artists and their catalogs that Hipgnosis has signed as a way of analyzing Hipgnosis's strategy in terms of always having access to writers and artists who are producing current hits, but also understanding the value in those evergreen long-term artists. And you can see some of the text there. The student refers, you know, and explains the graphs and the relevance, and also then refers, sort of uses third-party sources from, you know, popular music studies and music industry studies to support their analysis. Another question, in the UK, we have an organization called MEIEA Research, who do an awful lot of music futurology stuff, and are quite, you know, well renowned now. And one of the key writers is a guy called Keith Joplin, and he was talking about this idea of songs being mini industries, and that the music industries are increasingly reliant on a song as opposed to an album predominantly. And so again, one of the questions I posed to students last year was to explore that sort of premise and sort of question whether Joplin's sort of prediction would be right. And so you can see again here a student comparing, you know, the release of singles in the 90s using MusicID to compare the release of Beatles and Rolling Stones singles in the 1960s, and looking at their sales trajectories and length of time on the charts compared to the likes of Taylor Swift more recently, and doing some analysis on the rate, you know, how singles enter the charts and stay in the charts, and their level of influence and those types of things. Another student did a similar thing, but answered that question in a different way and looked at the sort of the almost enduring nature of Dancing Queen by ABBA, that's sort of never really sort of gone away in terms of sales and those types of things, or the ability of particularly social media now to make hits of yesteryear re-emerge and gain new popularity and new audience. And so again, just sort of constructing arguments for and against this idea of a song economy. And then lastly, interesting that we mentioned the NFTs. I posed that very question to my students that Kate and Andrew have just been discussing last year. And in this example here, the student chose the Kings of Leon, who at the time had just issued an album through an NFT with additional stuff. And so he used the MusicID platform to compare the historical album sales data of the Kings of Leon, and then you can see him using the IR metric that's within the MusicID revenue module to sort of compare the value of you know, pre-NFT album releases and the rationale for why the Kings of Leon might have done it as an NFT this time around. And another student, going back to Katie's point just before in the questions, looked at, you know, well, if Dua Lipa was to take one of her current singles and sell a portion of that ownership of the copyright in the song or the recording as NFTs, how much they could sell it for, and how much the owners would have to, how much revenue the owners of the NFT with a percentage share of a recording would need to get back for them to sort of recoup their investment and those types of things. So again, for me, it's been fascinating being able to pose all these types of questions to the students, have them use MusicID as a starting point very often to answer those questions. And then see what answers they come back with. And they're using, even though they've got the same access to the same data and the same platform, the same modules, their approach to even answering the questions is different, and they're using different case studies and different examples. This year, one of my dissertation students has got a question of what does it mean to go gold, looking at the way that sales data has, and the rules that define what is a gold standard release or platinum release, and how unit sales, streaming users are now sort of manipulated to refer to unit sales in the age old, and are we comparing like with like anymore when we're talking about sales and those types of things? And we'll use MusicID to do some case study analysis. And then now that MusicID has sort of improved since last year in terms of the immediacy of its data, I'm thinking about this time looking at it from a much more sort of entry-level artist sort of thing, like Andrew was alluding to with tracking sales data, and asking students to predict the success of some up-and-coming managers in the UK that are supported by the Music Managers Forum, to give and look at the roster of artists that they manage. And so the students will have to predict who is going to be the most successful manager. And as a side note, a couple of the students whose examples have pulled out here have all ended up with jobs in Centric Music Publishing and Horus Music, which are sort of a digital publishing platform that have just been bought by Ubiquity, the fintech company from Switzerland, I think. And Horus Music is a digital music aggregator distributor, and so a couple of them got jobs in these companies, not as necessarily a direct consequence, but certainly their engagement with data with us certainly helped give them a bit more to talk about in the interview. Thanks very much. Any questions?
All right, thanks a lot, Matt. That was super interesting to hear all of those things. As much as I've been using MusicID, there were even a few things there that I haven't even thought to look for in there, such as the Kings of Leon NFTs. Mm-hmm. I'm happy that you showed some of the graphs there. That's what I was mentioning in my introduction about the interactive visualizations. The graphs will show you, as you've seen, what is in the chart, and then you can scale it in the X and the Y axis and superimpose different things, the different albums, different countries, different artists, and so on. So it gives you a good sort of bird's eye view. And I know as a medievalist who's out of touch with a lot of maybe modern music industry things, just being able to visualize the information, especially as a visual person, I didn't even realize that the streaming economy, the life cycle in the streaming is so different from how it was in the past. Like if some of you probably saw, like the lines are very zigzaggy. It's just so much in and out. And sometimes they have longer lives, but it also seems like it affects the overall performance because it's up, down, up, down, up, down, where traditionally maybe it was a shorter life in this, shorter life cycle in the chart, but it would be more of a consistent curve, like an upside down bell curve, sort of showing the amount of time that it was getting money from sales. So now I'm kind of curious how, just as leading me to another research question, is how, if so much of the revenue is now concentrated into streaming, I wonder how that affects some of the overall revenue that artists have had. If they're losing, because if there's such a smaller piece of the pie, so they must be losing money on physical sales.
Some of them do quite well out of physical sales still. But again, in some ways, particularly with albums now, interestingly, with this used to be singles, I think last year in the UK, there was, I think, 23 different #1 albums, which is a record in 1 year. So whereas certainly in the sort of, the sort of pre-download era, the idea was that your single, you saw it with some of the Taylor Swift examples there, and even with streaming to a certain extent, that you chart high and then drop out, whereas 60s and 70s bands charted low, and as momentum built sales sort of sustained over time. You start to see that now with albums, because everyone drives, there's still a market for physical albums, vinyl, and the resurgence of the CD here in the UK as well at the minute. And so, but everyone sort of goes for those first week sales to get as high a chart position as possible, because obviously that generates more marketing and PR, and then sort of streaming sales come up, sort of behind. So everyone's trying to sell their sort of album version, physical version, to dedicated, fans straight away. And so it's interesting that the physical album acts more like a a marketing tool now, then for the sort of follow-up sort of streaming and other sort of merchandise that you can buy. And then obviously, as Andrew and Kayla were alluding to, sells the tour, and that's where artists are still now, we're sort of back to some semblance of normal operation, can still make decent amounts of money, and then on merch sales and those types of things at the gigs themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super interesting. I loved the thing you had in about Jopling predicting that individual songs would be many industries, because with the NFTs, I think we've certainly seen that the way putting out an album becomes this entire package of benefits that you can get. For any of you who are not familiar with NFTs, the teeny little bit that I know is sometimes maybe you're buying an image, but it often comes with privileges to other things. So you might get, I know Adidas has some NFTs out now that will later on give you merch. So you spend maybe $100 on their image, but you also get the clothes from the image and some additional privileges with that. So I presume it's similar with the music, where you buy maybe the image they put out and then you are given the download code for the album or things like that. Or
yeah, if I recall correctly, I think the Kings of Leon was like guaranteed front row seats at so many concerts across the year, and there's like a whole suite of benefits by buying the album as an NFT. Yeah.
And also, Kayla and Andrew, please feel free to turn your cameras and chime in here, and we'll go on and chatter. I see Dwayne Jackson has a question, which I'll answer in just a moment. If anyone has any questions, raise your hand or type it into chat. For our last 6 to 10 minutes here, we can just expand the conversation. But this whole NFT thing, I thought of it with Andrew, and I thought of it again now with you mentioning you get the guaranteed front row seats. I wonder how this impacts or could impact some of the overall sales, because these things are so expensive that they're frequently limiting the access. And even if it's on the inexpensive side for an NFT, which might be $50 or $100, that's still much more than just buying a CD would be. And I wondered, NFTs are such a small part of the overall picture right now, but I wonder if there's any risk, or what you have any thoughts, if there's any risk of this just continuing to consolidate access to music or anything else into a very small percentage of people. And I wonder if that would then feed into cutting into artists' earnings, because they can make fewer sales.
For me, it's part of a broader pattern of how the economy shifted. So from a crowd, it's not that dissimilar in essence to crowdfunding. There's right. And the hypnosis thing, so you can buy shares in hypnosis, so that effectively gives you a partial ownership of the copyrights that hypnosis owns, and so you get a certain type of music fan or person who is really interested in being closer to the artist in some way, in ways that sort of have changed post digitalization. And again, because of the removal of tangible product and that type of thing. So these are ways of be it, crowdfunding or NFTs or buying shares in hypnosis. These are all ways of people expressing their fandom or investment or support in artists in a much more sort of direct way. And again, the examples that Andrew used with, going to concerts in the metaverse and those types, these are all just ways of being closer to the artist in some way, and I think has a certain and is a growing part of the economy and will continue to be so, and sort of runs alongside the sort of more traditional sort of streaming model and those types of things. Not necessarily a replacement for it. It's an and both thing, not an either or thing.
Yeah, interesting. Let me answer Dwayne's question real quick, and then I'll go back to more of the topic. Dwayne asks, basically how MusicID is available. He went to the website and he didn't see a way to get access. MusicID is primarily an institutional subscription, the way you would have with JSTOR or something. We do offer individual subscriptions at a very small rate for someone who just needs to use it personally for a year or so. But primarily you would go through your university library or department budget, and we do a subscription by IP address to institutions. So if anyone has questions there, you can direct them to us at sales@academicrightspress.com, and we'll be happy to send you the brochure, and Paul will pop in on the end and tell you a little bit more about how you can subscribe. So I hope that answers your question. The website will show you some images of the product, but there's no direct access to the product through the page because that is set up through the institutions, right? Great, glad. He just wrote that answers the question. So one last thing that I was thinking with valuation is a big question. Every time I have a conversation recently, rights acquisition comes up. And something that I hadn't considered was what Andrew mentioned with artists and smaller labels being able to keep tabs on some of their streaming and other sales that are maybe getting lost in that black box that you mentioned. And it just occurred to me that MusicID is seems like it would be a good resource for that, especially presumably, labels are going to have their reports that the artist can reference. But if you want to go check on it on your own, I'm aware, excuse me, I'm very conscious that the streaming charts in particular are just so ephemeral. They're on the website and constantly changing. They're there for the day and they disappear. I know that there are some other websites that collect them, but sometimes they're limited. For MusicID now, what we have weekly charts. We're not able currently to have the daily charts, but we've got weekly charts and we have daily charts on a Monday. So just one tiny piece of that. But yeah, I was just suddenly thinking about how that I should hope it would be useful for small artists and independent labels maybe to do some of their own investigation to be sure that their artists are getting paid what they should be.
Yeah, absolutely. So the catalog sales are upwards of 20x multiples right now. So if you are missing 30% of your money because you haven't collected on it, the way that these valuations are done is they go and they analyze they consolidate all the royalty statements for a song, a catalog, whatever it is. And then they look at the historical performance of these earnings, and then they do some type of a projection as to how well they think it's going to do in the next 20, 100 years until the copyright goes into public domain. And if you're missing 30%, that can significantly impact the value of what somebody is willing to pay for those copyrights. So really making sure that you're collecting on everything that's due to you and fact checking it against consumption using MusicID would be incredibly helpful, because every dollar that you collect, it could potentially be 20 more dollars that somebody's going to pay for it.
Yeah, and one other small thing that I remembered during Matt's thing, as a musicologist, a lot of what I do is kind of with reception and genre formation and thinking of sort of long scale influence. So I didn't know about this hypnosis project where they're buying what they call the most influential songs of all time. And it just suddenly occurred to me that revenue is useful for that, because our revenue data, as I said before, is from the year 2000. So it will only show you songs and just recordings in general, songs and albums that have been in circulation, earning a significant amount of money in the 21st century. So that would be a very quick shortcut to looking at something like what are the most influential songs, at least probably of all time, because if it was released in 1955 and it's still making money enough to rate in our top 2000 or so in the site, then it's clearly an evergreen.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, White Christmas, sort of.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
number one song of all time.
So it was fascinating for them to be able for the students to be able to use the platform in a way to compare and contrast. Some of the part of one of the modules, the data analysis one, to look at historical trends and those types of things, but then really dig down into the economics. So with the Kings of Leon example again, you could basically look at the revenue generated from albums and singles because they're a 21st century act, and then look at that comparatively to again a predictive case for sort of the value of the NFT, or with hypnosis again, the banking on the fact that the catalog of songs that they're acquiring are going to be predominantly evergreen and be used an awful lot over a long period of time, as Andrew's just talked about.
Yeah. I assume it's complicated to try to cobble all of that together into one rights packages, but that's a whole other conversation. Well, before I start to wrap up, does anyone in the audience have any additional questions? Oh, great, there is one. So let's take this and then we'll move on. So again, from Dwayne, says, what is MusicID's take on music data integrity? So we see these news articles of people gaming the system and buying streams. That's a really good point. And our take is basically that we well, we don't have a position formally on this. We give you the data as it is in the system. So unfortunately, there's no way for us to analyze the way that labels or whoever will use bots to just drive up streams. That's definitely a major issue of just having a script that will stream it 1 million times and then suddenly you're viral. And of course, that's something that would be available to anyone, because if you have the friend who can write a script to do that, then you're not reliant upon, I suppose you guys might know more about it than I do, but it seems like a good way as an independent artist to game the system to get your foot in the door. Because if you can write the script, then you can do that to get yourself on the charts and get some money or get noticed. But in short, if you're looking at our system, unfortunately, there's no way to dig into that. You'll just see you can see the raw data. You could compare streaming data against some of the physical sales that we have, or the conventional charts, which include physical sales and streaming, such as Billboard or Official Charts Company, and you can compare that and see if there's a really huge disparity that is outside of the bounds of a normal gap.
I think it goes, actually, you flip the question around and use MusicID to explore data integrity as a concept, because for time immemorial things have been hyped in the charts, and particularly that question that what does it mean to go gold. Well, the chart rules and regulations, how things have been counted, have changed so much over time. Really, a gold award now for an album is not the same as a gold award in the 2000s, certainly not the same as a gold award in the 1980s. Even though the number might be the same, 100,000 sales in the UK, how those sales are calculated and all those types of things have changed so much in that period of time, that what MusicID enables you to do is explore questions about data integrity, not just in terms of nefarious activity and hyping things into the arts, but just how things have been counted by the industry itself, which is, up until very recently and still there's a long way to go, is not hugely accurate. Most of it's been done on samples and those sales samples and those types of things in chart return stores. So, data, people used to identify the chart return stores and actually make sure that people went and bought the records in those stores, because it gave them, more sales than buying records in stores that were chart return stores. This type of stuff's always gone on. So I think you could use MusicID to explore those questions productively.
Great, thank you. Well, we're out of time now, so let me just wrap up, and I'll throw over to Paul so he can just give you some of the short subscription information for anyone who's interested in passing that along to their librarian or their department. I certainly hope that this has given the audience some ways of the many different varied ways that you can use MusicID and from education into actual professional applications at music business. For me, like as a musicologist, if you'd like any other use cases, we have some on our website, which is musicIDhub.com. I'll put that in the chat quickly. And we have some case studies there and some videos. And you can always reach us at sales@academicrightspress.com with any questions, or if you just want to chat. So thanks so much to our presenters. It was really great hearing from your recent work here. And thanks to everyone who's stuck with us to hear them out. And I'll send you back over to Paul just so he can remind you of the discounts available to institutions and how you can subscribe.
Thank you, Katie. And thank you everybody else for taking the time out to give us such a fascinating insight into the world of NFTs, certainly. So just as a final reminder for those still with us, we have here a special discount for those that are MEIEA members. So as part of our sponsorship of MEIEA this year, we're happy to provide a 15% discount for MEIEA members. And as Dwayne was asking earlier, this is an institutional license that we provide, but it is unlimited. So you can have unlimited users, you can have unlimited access, unlimited download of information for use for academic purposes. And yeah, very simply, just reach out to us at sales@academicsrightspress.com, and we'll be very happy to help you set you up with a demonstration of the product, even introduce you to other people who are using the product very successfully for either research or for teaching purposes, or, for example, in Matt's case, creating even master's courses that are giving people huge data literacy skills and vocational skills moving forward. Having said all that, I'd just like to thank you very much indeed for taking the time out of your day to join us today. A huge thank you for Katie for moderating, and for Matthew and Andrew and Kayla for providing such fascinating presentations. We look forward to hopefully everyone that's joined us today enjoying the product in the near future, or with us speaking with you very soon. Thank you very much, everybody.